Ivy stood frozen in front of the crumbling old house. It looked like it might collapse any second. In her trembling hand was a paper from the county social services office, the address written in black ink. She checked it again. Yes, this was the house she'd been given after aging out of the group home, but it was falling apart before her eyes. An elderly woman from next door noticed her and walked over slowly. "Sweetheart, are you looking for someone?" she asked gently. Ivy shook her head and opened the small notebook she always carried. She wrote a question and held it up. "Is there another house with this same address somewhere nearby?" The old woman pulled her glasses from her cardigan pocket and read the note carefully. Her face fell with surprise. "No, dear, there's only one house at this address." She paused. "Why don't you speak?" Ivy sighed and shook her head again. The woman's heart ached watching her. "That's going to make your life so hard, honey. Why are you here alone? Do you have family in this town?" Ivy quickly scribbled something else in her notebook and turned it around to show her. The woman read it, gasped, and pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness, what did you agree to? Didn't anyone show you the house before you signed?" Ivy only shrugged, unsure what else there was to say. A single tear slid down her cheek. She had no idea what to do next. The woman gave her a warm, motherly smile. "Don't cry, dear. Come have some tea with me. We'll figure something out together." Ivy followed her. They stepped into a small, cozy house that smelled of fresh bread and clean soap. "Don't be afraid," the woman said. "I live alone. My son and his wife only visit on weekends." She pointed proudly at a framed photo of her son in a police uniform, and Ivy could tell right away this was no ordinary officer, but someone respected. They sat down for tea, and the woman asked Ivy's name. Ivy wrote it down, Ivy Bennett. The old woman introduced herself as Alina Hayes. She told Ivy about a dear friend of hers who lived at the end of the street, an elderly woman also in need of help. "Her relatives are greedy," Alina said. "All they want is her house. They've been looking for someone to live in and help care for her. You could try it." Alina warned her that the relatives only visited hopping to inherit the property. "Tell them I sent you," she said. "They won't pay much, but at least you'll have somewhere to stay." Ivy wrapped her arms around the old woman in a gentle hug. Alina's eyes welled up with tears. "If anything ever goes wrong, you come straight back to me, understood?" Ivy nodded and set off to find the house. She followed the directions and arrived at a large, tired-looking home. She rang the bell over and over. Finally, a sleepy, balding man opened the door. Ivy handed him a note. He read it, then called out to his wife. "Deanne, come here." A drowsy woman appeared beside him. Both looked stunned when Ivy never said a word. They asked if she planned to live there, and Ivy nodded. They explained they couldn't pay much, but she'd have meals included. Desperate, Ivy accepted. Diane rushed through instructions. "We're leaving soon. We won't be back until the day after tomorrow. We didn't want to leave the old woman alone." She led Ivy to a room that reeked of medicine and sickness. An elderly woman named Dorothy Callahan lay stiffly on a worn-out sofa, a dirty bucket sitting in the corner. "She's too weak to get to the bathroom," Diane said flatly, then hurried out, leaving Ivy alone with the frail stranger. Ivy wrote a note and handed it over. Dorothy squinted, and Ivy found her glasses resting nearby. She finally read the message, "I'm here to help you." Dorothy whispered, "An orphan?" Ivy nodded. "Have they already left?" the old woman asked. "I'm hungry." Ivy checked outside. The car was gone. She came back and wrote, "I'll make you something to eat." Dorothy nodded weakly, and Ivy asked if she should help her sit up. After a moment's hesitation, Dorothy agreed. The kitchen had barely any food, but Ivy managed to make a simple omelet and tea. She helped Dorothy rise from the sofa, and when she lifted her sleeves to adjust her cardigan, she saw deep, ugly bruises covering her arms. "I fall off the sofa sometimes," Dorothy murmured. Ivy pretended to believe her. She wrote, "Eat, rest, then I'll clean you up and wash you properly." Dorothy nodded, tears slipping down her face. Ivy scrubbed the room from top to bottom. The bedding had been tossed carelessly in a corner. She washed everything, cleaned with all her strength, and slowly the room began to feel fresh again. She even watered every dying plant in the house. By evening, the whole home smelled different, alive again. Ivy returned to check on Dorothy. "How do you feel?" she wrote. "Better," Dorothy said. "So much better, I think I could even try walking now." Ivy helped her take a warm bubble bath, changed the sheets, and washed her clothes. That night, the old woman seemed like an entirely different person. She cried softly and said, "No one has cared for me like this in years." Ivy switched on the television, and Dorothy gasped in delight. "The remote! I thought it was gone forever." Ivy smiled and pointed under the sofa cushion where she'd found it earlier. They shared a light dinner, and Ivy left a note asking the relatives to bring proper groceries next time. For an entire month, Ivy stayed with Dorothy, cleaning, cooking, caring for her like a daughter would. The old woman grew stronger, smiled more, watched her shows, and flipped through old photo albums. But her relatives didn't like seeing her improve. Ivy was only given one day off each week, always when the relatives came to visit. One day she returned to find Dorothy silent and withdrawn, refusing food, wanting only to sleep. As Ivy tucked her in, she noticed fresh bruises on her arms and neck. She said nothing, walked outside, and stood there shaking. She'd just been paid, so she walked quickly to a small electronics shop nearby. A kind young clerk understood her written notes, sold her a tiny hidden camera, and patiently explained how to use it, even giving her a discount. "Come back and tell me how it goes," he said with a smile. Ivy nodded gratefully. On her next day off, she quietly set up the camera. Days passed, and Dorothy opened up more. The relatives weren't even close family, just distant cousins. Dorothy had never had children of her own. She'd worked for decades as a supervisor and had saved a modest fortune. Ivy finally understood. They only wanted the house and the money. One afternoon, Ivy came back earlier than expected. The relatives had already left. She found Dorothy in tears. Ivy grabbed the camera and reviewed the footage, her hands shaking violently. Diane had been screaming, demanding the deed to the house. Frank had struck Dorothy and shouted at her to sign everything over. Ivy was shattered. She wrote quickly, "Why don't you ever tell anyone?" Dorothy answered, "What would change, dear? Who would even care about me?" Ivy didn't wait another second. She grabbed the camera and ran, remembering Aliner's son, the one in the police uniform. Maybe he could help. She pounded on Aliner's door. Aliner opened it and gasped at the sight of Ivy, pale and trembling. "Come in, what happened? Is Dorothy all right?" Ivy handed the camera to Aliner's son. He watched the footage in silence, his expression turning stone cold. "This is Aunt Dorothy," he said grimly. "My mother's oldest friend." He stood immediately. "She needs help right now." He called the hospital, and paramedics arrived within minutes. Dorothy was rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. Through her tears, all she could think about was Ivy. "They'll hurt her for this," she cried, but Aliner promised, "I won't let anything happen to this girl, not ever." Deanne and Frank were arrested within days. The police found overwhelming evidence of abuse. Ivy visited Dorothy at the hospital every single day. They missed each other deeply. During one visit, Aliner's grandson walked in. The family told Ivy she was welcome to move back into the house and live there again. When Ivy arrived, she'd prepared everything to write down so she wouldn't feel embarrassed in front of the grandson. But the moment she stepped inside, she froze completely. It was him, the same young man who had sold her the camera. "So you're the one who caused all this wonderful trouble?" he asked, grinning. Aliner laughed. "Caleb, you two already know each other." He nodded. "Yeah, Grandma, she bought a camera from me. Guess I helped a little too." Ivy felt her cheeks flush, her fingers tightening around the folded paper in her pocket. She no longer needed it. The two grandmothers watched her with wide, knowing smiles. "Remember," they reminded her, "the doctor said you need 2 hours of speech practice every day." Ivy laughed softly and began forming small sounds. She'd been in speech therapy for almost a year now, and little by little, her voice was finding its way back to her. On her wedding day, standing across from Caleb, she didn't write her answer down on paper. She looked straight into his eyes and said softly, "I do."